Okay, I think it's Emily. I think it's just about 11 o'clock. I think we'll get started, yeah, and I'm sure we'll be joined as the time goes by. But we know it's 5 o'clock in 5 o'clock in Switzerland, so it's getting towards the end of the workday, and I'll do a brief introduction of myself and DC LERA, and then we're going to turn it over to having a conversation with Christy Hoffman, the General Secretary of UNI Global Union. So I'm Steve Slay, the president of DC LERA, and we have a full set of virtual programs we're doing in 2021. We have a great schedule all the way through June. We hope to be back live in person come September, but we'll see how that goes. That's my optimistic side of me is planning on in-person meetings starting in September. But we have a good set of programs, and we would direct you to go to the DC LERA webpage and check out those programs. I'll come back to this at the end, but February 24th, we have a great program, another one where we'll have an international speaker, Horst Mundt from the IG Metall in Germany, Steve Sylvia, who's on our board and teaches at the American University, will be on that. And one of our board members, Anya Wheeler-Schock, will be hosting that conversation. And Christy, one of the really interesting things about DC LERA is that we have a lot of international folks. So we have people from the embassies of France, Spain, Germany, Korea, Japan, Sweden, who attend our meetings, and hopefully some of them are on today. So we have a real international flavor to the local chapter, as well as local labor, employment, and government officials. So that's sort of the background of DC LERA. The National LERA, who is hosting this, is pivoted very quickly to doing everything online and virtually. We did our annual conference back in June virtually, which was quite amazing and very effective, and we'll be doing that again this June. Instead of being in Detroit, we'll be virtual again. So we hope you can join us for some of those sessions as we go ahead. But enough of the background. Just thrilled to have Christy Hoffman today to talk to us about the incredibly important work that she's doing and her organization is doing. UNI Global Union represents almost 20 million service sector workers. And before you tell us about UNI Global Union, Christy, one of the things that I like to do is sort of set the context for people about how you got to where you are. And you and I actually share a little bit of history together. And so why don't you just talk about your amazing career, and don't be modest, because it is an amazing career.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks for the invitation to join you today. As you can hear from my accent, I'm American. I'm from the United States. I've lived in Europe now for since 2004, with a brief return to the US around the time that Obama was elected. So I realize you're on the the eve of a very historic day, and it's very emotional time, for me as well as you. I'm sure. I was just saying to Steve that no matter where you are in the world right now, if you're American, you're really watching a lot of CNN. But in terms of my career, and I started out working in a jet engine factory in 1977, actually 1978. And stayed there for quite some time as it was a unionized factory in Connecticut. I was a chief shop steward. I really loved my work there. I was a member of the International Association of Machinists, and then eventually left the factory floor to become an organizer and working for the international office, a title called the Grand Lodge Rep, which sounds a little dated, but I spent about 10 years with the machinists and loved my work negotiating and handling grievances. And I do believe that all of the the work that I did during that period has set me up for what I do now, because I'm once again negotiating with employers pretty much on a daily or regular basis about all kinds of issues. Certainly not the ones I faced back in the 80s, but it's the same point. Sometimes too little has changed in that long period of time. After I left Pratt & Whitney, I went to become a lawyer, and I was counsel at the mine workers during the aftermath of the Pittston strike. I also worked at was assistant general counsel at the Teamsters Union, as representing in particular the small package division with the UPS workers when they had their national strike in 1997. And then my latest legal work was with SEIU and James and Hoffman, one of their law firms as well. And I left in 2004 to join Uni. And I must say, Steve, we don't say you and I. I love the way the subtitles have interpreted it, meaning you and I. That's actually a nice way to look at it. It's all of us together, but we call it Uni, Uni Global Union. And I was, I've run global campaigns from Uni and worked in one of our sectors, property services, cleaning and security, and then later became the deputy general secretary, and in 2018, the general secretary. So just to say a little bit about Uni, we're a federation of unions from around the world, 150 countries across the service sectors. And I should explain a little bit who that includes, because we represent some of the lowest paid workers in the world. And by that, nursing home workers and cleaners are among our lower paid workers, not to say lower valued. And post office workers, IT and tech workers, all the workers in retail, food retail, other retail, e-commerce, and property services, that's cleaners and security guards. And then we also have the media workers, so the film producers, the IATSE, and the Writers Guild and so on in the media sector, as well as the professional athletes. So all of the professional athletes in the US, the Football Players Association, baseball, basketball, and so on belong to Uni. So we have a big range of sectors, and all of our sectors have their own programs and strategies and so on, but we're coherent in terms of how we identify the problems that workers face and what the solutions are in the big picture. And we have a really interesting, we've had a very interesting year in 2020 in the sense that, you have, for the players and for the, media workers, like their big event has been really negotiating these back to work protocols, which have been quite complex for the film production and the, getting back onto the basketball court. On the other side, we've got, nursing home workers who are really, obviously struggling, and cleaners and grocery store workers, the essential workers who've been a big part of our emphasis. So I'll stop there. That's kind of my career in a mini, in 40 years and 4 minutes, but yeah.
40 years and 4 minutes. And we didn't know each other at the Machinist, but I served my apprenticeship at the Machinist from 74 to 78 in Chicago at a printing press company. And then you and I worked together at the Teamsters in the early and mid 90s. So it was really a pleasure working with you back then. But so talk a little bit more about what Uni does and how it's organized and how it's sort of governed. 150 countries, 20 million workers. That's an enormous amount of potential clout. And just so, how does it how do these international secretariats work, and what's sort of the structure?
So we're set up much like many, international unions are. We have both a regional and geographic structure overlaid with the matrix of a sectoral structure. So, for example, SEIU has divisions, or so the regions of the joint councils of the Teamsters. At the same time, you've got your divisions that really drive the industrial strategy. So we have 4 regions, Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Europe. Each one of them has their elected leadership, but we have our 10 sectors that are consistent across all the regions, and they each have a global structure. So our head office is in Switzerland. The head of what we call our sector head, the department lead, the head of departments, and they have their team stretched out across all the regions, and we're pretty coherent. The regions and the center work very closely together. I'm thankful to say, we've got an agenda which is about building union power across all of our sectors. We, have a big emphasis on working with multinationals and winning rights from multinationals to respect the freedom of association, the right to organize. So that's a big emphasis that we share across all of our sectors. Obviously there's an exception with the athletes because they don't have multinationals, but they do have really big leagues. They have Commonwealth Games, for example, where we've been negotiating. So our core work is really about building union strength in our industries. And then we also have the program around policy change and what we call changing the rules. Mainly our focus is on corporate accountability, less than some of the other, the International Trade Union Confederation, the sort of the hub of all of the national centers like the AFL-CIO. They're more working on the big macroeconomic issues, but we are more focused on corporate accountability than the G20. And then, of course, traditionally, the role of an international secretariat is to bring people together from around the world to share strategies, common positions on issues. One of the issues we're really deep into right now is the practicality and the policies around remote work, for example. But we would have, common issues in retail. You can imagine that even health and safety right now, like what's our common position across all the retail industry about, the fair treatment for workers in grocery retail. So sharing best practices has always been a big part of an international secretariat, but we've tried to move beyond that and get more into the organizing side of our industries, because services have never been especially well organized, not in the US, of course, but not anywhere else either outside of Western Europe. And so we have organizing centers, we have organizing teams, we do a lot of training, we do a lot of capacity development, and we do campaigns involving global companies.
Fantastic. At our last session with DC LERA, we had a representative of the NFL Players Association talk about the salary cap and how it works, and a lot of these same issues. So our listeners will be quite familiar with that. And I didn't realize that the pro athletes were part of uni. So that's great. Very cool. So talk a little bit more about the global frameworks and how you work with, how do you try to leverage these big companies? As you mentioned, both you and I bargained with some of the biggest companies, whether it was UPS or Boeing or any of these big companies. How receptive are they to the role that you guys play, and what are the leverage points to bring them to the table to actually talk about improving working conditions for people?
Well, really depends what the issue is. We have found that employers have been very receptive to talk to us during this recent year because they would like to have global policies on issues. And you can't have a global policy if you don't have a global counterpart. That certainly would be our position. You can't many of the European companies, are openly committed to social dialogue, which is sort of, the catch-all, which would include collective bargaining. And in general, as a general principle, it's easier to get buy-in on your policies from workers and unions if it's negotiated with the union. So, and many times companies are more than eager to talk to us about the common problems that we face. We've been negotiating back to work agreements. We've been negotiating remote work agreements. We've been negotiating health and safety practices across retail. I think we probably have 20 agreements with different sets of employers that we've signed this year, or especially some agreements in Europe, but even global. In the past, outside of the special circumstances of COVID, the hardest thing, and this should not be the case, but the hardest thing is to persuade companies that they should allow organizing in those countries where unions are not already present at their work site. And when I say allow, meaning it's certainly illegal to prevent completely organizing, but we know the union busting techniques that are in place in the US, and it's all too common in the rest of the world. So the hardest thing is to really break that resistance, and all of our global agreements provide for that. But it's been hard to enforce those agreements in countries where there's a really, really stiff resistance at the level of country level management. And I would include the US in that bucket. That doesn't mean we don't try, and we have had some success, but I don't want to say it's been universal. We have about 60 global agreements, and all of which focus on the right to organize as a core feature. The companies would be more than happy to negotiate over, sexual harassment policies and all kinds of other issues. And where it gets hard is when we start talking about worksite access and neutrality and enforcement measures. But we still make some success there. And our relationships with those companies prove to be really invaluable when we're going through problems of organizing, which we often do. What's the leverage? It really depends on how hard of a campaign we need to have, and whether sometimes it's not as hard as others. We have a campaign right now that I would say we're trying to use maximum leverage against, which is organizing call center workers, a company of about 400,000 workers, almost all non-union, a French company. This is a growing industry. It's not shrinking. It's very much in demand during COVID. The conditions were terrible during COVID. And the leverage is, we are talking to their investors, of course. We brought a case under the OECD guidelines. We've gotten lots of media about the horrific conditions in the Philippines. We've had them at the table. Long story, I won't go into all the, nitty gritty, but I would say that's where you look at who are the clients. We're talking to their clients, we're talking to their investors, we're talking to governments. And so eventually, I'm confident that it would make sense for them to negotiate an agreement and have a more fair system for their workers. That could be an example. We also have, we have a big program of work around Amazon. I don't expect Amazon's coming to the table with us anytime soon, but it's really important to put those issues in the spotlight, the policy issues of Amazon as well as the worker issues.
Yeah, really fascinating, and how the globalization has really made these kind of issues no longer just local issues. They truly are global issues. Could you just talk a little bit more about the leverage point from the finance side of the house? I'm particularly interested in, so much of the Wall Street and financial community is now seeming to buy into this notion of running their investments through environmental, social, and governance lens, ESG. BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, said that all of their investments will run through this screen. I don't really quite believe it, but what do you see as? Do you see that there's some momentum in that direction of for workers in the ESG on the financial side, and how are you sort of thinking about those issues?
I mean, that's a big issue for us, and we're just starting to get into it more heavily this year because, the stakeholder capitalism, this is the thing now. But when you go and dig into the weeds, first of all, S has never been, elevated to a high enough level to compete with G. I mean, when you compare the three factors, like I just say S is S. Let's talk about human rights, not governance. Let's talk about human rights. And that cannot be, well, as long as your governance is right, that wipes out the bad score you get on union stuff. No, that doesn't work that way. So we're kind of moving beyond, ESG now. It's really got to be respect for human rights. You see the new rules that are coming out from the big auditing firms that are trying to quantify. They want to have an equal scoring system across all the companies and stakeholder capitalism. The problem is that the freedom of association is not really ranked very highly as a risk. Other risks always are paid way more attention to, especially child labor and forced labor, which they should get attention. But, the rights of workers tend to get diminished in the scoring. And the other thing is and we're starting to do training with investors, on what does it mean to respect freedom of association? I mean, we're getting all these people who are like, we're technically, aligned with this, but we don't really know what to say when the employer says, this is just how we do it here. We're allowed to have captive audiences. We're allowed to do this. So we're doing actual training of some of the more friendly, SRIs, the socially responsible investors, and just more ongoing discussions with them. We do a lot of campaign work with them. So when we have a problem with a particular company, we'll go to a whole range of investors. But, the level of scoring doesn't work. The ESG framework doesn't work to elevate worker issues beyond, to a place that they need to be. Human rights do include the fundamental rights to organize and collective bargaining. They're not given a high enough scoring. They're not considered salient. So, well, if you don't consider them salient, you don't have to treat them as a risk under due diligence, human rights due diligence analysis. So this is where we're putting our emphasis. And I want to say the due diligence, human rights due diligence framework, which is, became the framework of the UN in 2011 and is now making its way through national legislation in Europe. I think that could make a big difference for the finance industry as well, because it's about, a framework of, showing respect for human rights. It's not ESG. So I'm very sort of down on ESG because I think it never works for workers. Right. But I mean, I don't object to the concept of stakeholder capitalism, but it's just that the devil's in the details.
Right. The devil is lining his pockets with lots of cash.
Exactly. I mean, it's just I would say it, if I wasn't in a public place, I might say it differently, but it's really, really. Yeah. And the B corporation, there's this whole thing about benefit corporations, right? And that's their position on freedom of association is poor. They say it's controversial. Really controversial? It's not really controversial.
Right.
But anyway.
Yep. So I want to talk about two other sort of broad set of issues, and then we're getting lots of questions from the audience. So we want to leave plenty of time for them. But sort of two broad sets of issues. One is technology. How is automation affecting service sector workers? And from where you sit, what is sort of the challenges and opportunities for new technology in the workplace. And then the second is really, the response to COVID and the pandemic. How has that impacted service sector workers? And you mentioned a lot about returning to work and all those things. But let's start with the technology. Sort of at both a high level or a micro level. How do you see automation and artificial intelligence and these issues, social media affecting service sector workers?
Well, I mean, obviously, we have a lot of different, sectors, and it's different everywhere. But to generalize a bit, I mean, we have some sectors that are highly impacted, and that would be the finance. So the bank workers, that's one of our large sectors, which I didn't mention earlier. Bank workers and ICTS, so information technology and, the communications. But of course, all of them are affected. Postal workers are affected, dramatically. Cleaners to some extent, security to some extent, everybody, there's an impact everywhere. And I can't, go so deep into the sector specifics for all of them, but I mean, our general approach is to say that, and I coming from a factory, I worked in a factory. When they introduced technology in my factory, I was the first to say, I want that machine where I have to push the button and I don't have to turn the wheel. So I'm like instinctively like, yeah, bring it on. It can have a lot of advantages. But at the same time, I had a union protection. Nobody was going to lay me off. I had all this safety around me. And the general wrap that we say around technology, AI is a big one. Surveillance, the surveillance which has been enabled by technology is a big issue in our sectors. Clearly, postal workers, the sorting centers have been impacted by technology for a very long time. In ICTS, we see the impact of technology enabling the fissuring of work, which is something David Weil has written so well about. But technology makes it possible to outsource everything. And so, we're seeing it manifest itself in outsourcing, surveillance for remote workers. Remote work is obviously, exploding during COVID, but enabled by new technologies that are coming on stream much more quickly. The long and the short of it is that in all these situations, the workers that have the right to bargain over these issues are able to navigate it for the better of themselves and also the company. And I think that where you have workers who have no rights to protest or engage in how is the technology going to be implemented, how is it going to affect my daily life? That's where it becomes really a big problem. And I just say for, surveillance for call center workers, for example, for them, it's a terrible intrusion. They have a camera on the full day long in their home of, what's going on in their home while they're working. And Albanian court just ruled yesterday that it was illegal to do that, but that's Albania. I don't know about the rest of the world just yet, but right. I think the surveillance is a big thing. AI in finance. Look, you see the finance workers in Europe negotiating over potentially packages for some of the workers. They won't have the number of bank branches in the future that they have now. People are moving to electronic banking at an alarming, very fast rate. But they're able to negotiate a just transition. And this is our ambition, is a just transition. Whereas the bank workers in the US are just they're just losing their jobs. And that's it. And there's nothing, there's no capacities to negotiate. So just transition is like the overall theme. And then in the weeds, in the details, depending on the technology. Surveillance, no, you shouldn't be able to surveil any more than is necessary. You shouldn't take away somebody's dignity. Remote work, there's a whole, we've got a laundry list of things that we should be negotiating with in connection with remote work. But again, if you've got the capacity to negotiate, that's why we think, keep banging away on collective bargaining and social dialogue being so important for this moment.
Yep. Excellent. And what about COVID? Just if you want to just talk for a minute or two about how this has changed the way you work, the way Uni is organized and it's performing its work, and sort of what are some of the lessons that you are learning about how workplaces around the world have reacted to the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in my office now on a Zoom call, and I probably wouldn't be doing this if I were, in my normal mode. So it's been opportunities, and also obviously it's got its drawbacks, to say the least. But how we're working is remotely, mostly, just like most other people in Europe. But we've actually been able to achieve a much greater visibility and than we would have normally. I mean, I might normally be speaking, twice a week at the most, but I'm flying to Singapore or Buenos Aires or something like that to meet with our affiliates. And now I'm, every day, twice a day. It's it's really like a speed up on steroids, for me. But on the other hand, I'm not able to really meet with people face to face. And so I suffer all the drawbacks that everyone does from not having enough social contact, but also not being able to meet our members and our affiliates. So I think, every offices are all, struggling through this. Most of our unions are not on remote work, to be honest. In Europe, if you represent essential workers, you are considered essential as a union rep, which I think is a great thing. But, technically I represent essential workers, and I could be in my office all the time as well. And I am here about half the time, but then it really depends on the industry. We've had industries that shut down temporarily. Fast fashion, for example, the non-essential work was basically shut down for months in the spring. We've had most of our workers are actually, of course, media and players are not going to work. You've got the Amazon warehouses full speed ahead. All the e-commerce, that's a big patch of work for us. The grocery store workers, the care workers, and so on. So we have the postal workers. Most of our members are still working and have been working throughout.
Okay.
So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's we covered a huge amount of ground in 35 minutes or so. Kevin Cassidy, are you on board? I'm not sure if I see you or not. If you are, I'm going to call on you to ask the first question, and then I will turn it over to one of our other folks who have logged in a question. Kevin, are you on board? Don't see Kevin. Okay, so let's go to Steve Sylvia. He's got a question about Amazon. Steve, Emily, can you unmute Steve Sylvia and let him talk? Emily, he seems to be muted.
Steve, can you unmute yourself?
I think I unmuted myself and then Emily muted me. But anyway, Christy, it's great to see you. I want to thank you for participating in this. I'm curious what Uni's been doing in terms of helping different unions organize Amazon. One thing obviously that's coming up is the election in Alabama, but also, for years there have been series of actions in Germany and in other places. And how involved have you been in working with the different unions and trying to coordinate them in order to maximize their efforts?
We've been having an Amazon Alliance for 7 years, which brings together all the unions from around the world who are organizing Amazon. And it used to be Germany, Italy, France. It's now expanded to 22 countries. And we, if you follow us on any social media or even our website, we were very, very active this past year, especially in working with all the unions where there are, all the countries where there are unions. So Germany, Italy, France, Spain, France, to some, and then the UK, and then some other countries as well, throughout the pandemic. And it had a big action together on Black Friday. Now, as far as Alabama goes, the president of RWDSU, who's involved in, that's the union organizing the warehouse in Alabama. He's also the president of our Uni Alliance of Amazon. And Stuart Applebaum, we've been quite engaged in supporting Stuart through his resistance to the HQ2 in New York, but also we will be quite active in connection with this Alabama campaign when it becomes more, depending on what happens. I mean, obviously, if it goes smoothly, there's no need for international solidarity, but we're definitely in close contact with RWDSU, and I think we've put out some statements, but let's see how it unrolls. It's a really big election. It's really exciting. If you would have asked me 5 years ago, like, could you just like that organize a warehouse of 6,000 workers, I would have said no way. But in this world we live in, anything's possible. So I'm very hopeful. And it's great that these workers are coming together saying, you know what, we need a union. And I don't expect that Amazon will be friendly towards the idea. They already have a website up. They're already campaigning. How heavily they campaign, remains to be seen, but we have to expect a pretty hard fight back.
Yeah, very good. Lucia Ortiz, I think, had a question. Lucia, and by the way, this is a new feature that we've added from LERA. We'll have a transcript of this meeting, which we'll make available. So that's the little translations right away. That's a very cool feature. Thank you. So Lucia.
Hi, hello. Do you copy me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you, Christy, for your presentation. It was fantastic and very, very interesting. I'm the Consular Labor here in Washington, D.C., the Embassy of Spain in Washington, and I was wondering if UNI has promoted any kind of worldwide conversation on raising salaries to essential workers because risk of COVID. Thank you.
We do. We have a campaign called Essential Rights for Essential Workers, and one is to have a dignified wage. And so and we put out a lot of promotional material on that, but also we've used that as been like the main messaging that we've had since, probably September, is really pushing for that and supporting our affiliates that are fighting for wage increases in their home countries. So we've been especially active in supporting the wage increases in the UK, where they've been trying to lift up the grocery store workers to 10 pounds an hour, the cleaners in Germany, the cleaners in the Netherlands, and definitely speaking out on behalf of the UFCW's campaign to get hazard pay and retroactive hazard pay. So we've been pretty vocal on this issue, and because I'm the leader of a global union, I get a lot of opportunity to speak on global platforms like the OECD or different international meetings, and that's been my main message, is that the essential workers need to be treated with more dignity, and they need a higher wage, but also they need sick days, they need social protection, they need the right to have a union.
That's great. So Lisa Powell, I think you're on. There you go, Lisa. If you could ask a question about supply chains, that was a really good one.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Christy. I was wondering what your thoughts are on the effectiveness of measures to improve transparency of supply chains. So, for example, products that might use slave labor or exploitive labor, or even in the DC area and metro areas, there are cleaning services that promote the fact that they pay their cleaners a living wage and pay benefits in their employees.
I mean, I think that transparency is always a good thing. If you can't see the problem, it's hard to act upon it. So I'm in favor of that. And in fact, in connection with the European legislation around due diligence, we're asking for transparency for every company on to what extent their workers are represented by a union in bargaining, like to what extent their workers are covered by a collective bargaining agreement. I do think that sometimes you have to be wary of the transparency that's just advertising. And, there's a lot of fake audits. There's a lot of fake, certifications, whether it's we're free from child labor in coffee or, we pay living wage. Well, I think I'm wary of that. I just think if you have transparency, it has to be legitimate, and it has to be, third party, like legitimately, not just a social audit company that's giving you a blue ribbon, because a lot of that is, a lot of that is just fake. I can't tell you how many companies I know that have told me, well, we're rated the best company to work in Colombia. Really? Is that, at how many are the best? Because I've heard that from 10 different companies, and it's all just what they pay for. So I would just be wary of the, the source of the promotion.
Thank you.
And Christy, could you just talk a little bit about, we were hoping that Kevin Cassidy would be on, but he got tied up in a staff meeting. Could you just talk about how you guys interact with the International Labor Organization, ILO, the UN, other multilateral, multinational organizations, but specifically with the ILO?
Obviously that we're based in Geneva because the ILO is here, and traditionally that's the UN agency that protects workers. It's not so much the bread and butter of UNI's work, because we're so much involved in company work versus government work, and the ILO is tripartite organization. And the worker representatives there tend to be the national center unions from the companies, from the countries. However, and we're deeply connected to pushing for new standards at the ILO, pushing for a supply chain standard, pushing for new standards on due diligence. So we might, and then we also have sectoral meetings, social dialogue, global social dialogue meetings at the ILO for our sectors. Maybe, once a year, we'll have all the workers from the finance unions around the world come together under the umbrella of the ILO to talk about issues of joint concern. So we're definitely engaged there to the extent that the new declaration on the future of work was very important for us. And we rely upon the ILO standards. We rely upon the ILO conventions. I think that the ILO has become difficult to for the workers' viewpoints in the past few years because of having Trump in the White House, and the US is such an important player in these multilateral institutions. In a shift towards becoming more overtly anti-collective bargaining across some of the, in a few other countries. So I look forward to having it be a more reasonable place. But yes, of course, we're very strongly tied to what happens at the ILO.
That's great. Thank you.
And if I could just answer the question on Google. I saw a question, and I'll just be really quick on that about what are we doing around Google, because that's been incredibly exciting to see the Google workers of the US come together in a union. We represent that sector. They're part of us. We're happy to say CWA, the code, the unit is part of UNI. And we just launched a Google Alliance, just similar to what we've had in Amazon, Google workers from other countries who also belong to a union. It's a small group. We're really happy to have them together. I think we just published something yesterday or today announcing that and what some of our big picture demands are. But I think that's a really positive thing. That taken together with the Amazon election are two really positive things for unions in the US.
Yeah, fantastic. We also had a question from Key about trade agreements, and what are your thoughts of union attitudes towards the EU-China trade agreement? Let's can we call Key up?
Hi. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for coming. It's really helping and very enrichment of through your conversation. I'm just curious about, do you know the recent EU sign with the China, the free trade agreement? I just wondering now, do you think have they any impact, or what's the union's attitude? Will they, sort of really, helping out with the more job creation, or you think maybe it's a threat? And how do you think about the future or more this kind of agreement? Thank you.
I just don't I don't want to express an opinion on that. I mean, it's not an area that we're really deeply into, but in particular, it's not an area that our European region is really engaged in. I mean, in general, obviously, we think that trade agreements should be linked to commitments to human rights. And obviously, we don't see that in China. So that's the bad side of it. Whether it will involve more investment in Europe or not, I'm not sure what the statistics are on that. And we have not taken a position on that trade agreement, nor have the European Trade Union, Center, as far as I know.
And are Chinese unions part of your Union
No.
Global?
Because they're not really unions, they're state
Right.
agencies.
Right. Yep. Okay, I saw a question from Arian about childcare. Is Arian, can we unmute Arian Hegwich?
Hello, am I unmuted? Right, sorry,
Yeah.
it's just a photo.
Yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to ask whether you see an opportunity to put childcare or employer-supported childcare on the bargaining agenda. It's been a big issue in the United States. Unions aren't that active. They're very active in asking for more public supports. So I'm just trying to cover that small aspect of making it part of the benefits that are bargained for.
That's so specific to the country. In most countries, the emphasis is on public support for benefits rather than negotiating benefits, and especially in Europe. And I understand the unions in the US are also demanding public support for childcare as opposed to employer support. But it's not an issue, I have to say, that's come up for us in any with any of our unions outside of the US, because in most cases, the question of childcare is, a public and with some private contribution usually, but it's heavily publicly subsidized.
Thanks.
Jeff Wheeler, did you want to ask a question or have a message of hope, perhaps?
Hope is a good thing. Yeah, so it's great to hear the conversation, Christy. I appreciate the comments. And also, I have the same doubts about global supply chains and about appropriately dealing with labor rights. Well, I was the president of the union over at the Department of Labor, and now I'm over at USAID. And so the question is, what do you recommend in terms of U.S. policy for the Biden administration of what we should be focusing on in terms of labor rights programming and policy? And I'm wondering, I'm poking around a bit too on kind of the connection with climate change, sustainable cities, and other matters. But I'm wondering what would be your recommendations to the new administration of what we need to focus on labor rights?
Well, look, you're asking the wrong person, because there's plenty of US trade unionists who would have a long laundry list, and I don't disagree with any of those laundry lists, but I know, there's a whole question of what are the legislative changes that need to be made, and the right to organize, and the change in fundamental labor law has got to be critical. But there's a lot of executive order things, whether it's in the huge number of laundry lists at the Department of Labor. And, it's not really for me to say what they should prioritize, and I'm speaking really from a global perch, but I think there's all undoing as a starting point, all the damage that Trump did in terms of reducing the ability to get overtime pay. And of course, the gig workers and misclassification has to be taken on, I think, front and center. But the fundamentals of being able to organize, that has to be fixed. But I hate to comment too specifically on the US political agenda because it's not really my place to do that.
Yeah, just to clarify, I wasn't talking about the US law, but we actually fund a lot of overseas programs, a lot of development programs around the world and in the developing world. And so that's what we're looking at, kind of what can we focus on around the world in terms of promoting labor rights and plugging that into some bigger issues.
I mean, look, the US knows how to do that if they have the will to do that. I mean, it's a question of enabling collective bargaining, representation. It's a question of living wages, and, you know, just in conditioning, you know, some investment in other kinds of support on certain key standards. We've done that in Bangladesh, for example. We negotiated the Bangladesh Accord, and that was only about safety, but it is doable. You can say, you know, you've got to have safe factories. You could add to that, you know, you've got to pay living wage in these factories. You've got to have freedom of association. I mean, those are 3 starting points right there. And I think that it's just a question of conditioning support on key elements. But freedom of association is really, in many of those countries, is very, very hard to find.
Okay, I think getting close to the last question, John Russo has a question about universal basic income. John, do you want to articulate that a little bit?
Oh, there. Huh?
Yep, you're on.
Christy, thanks for your discussion today. I just did a long interview with PBS on the future of work. And the question really they're stressing is, will there be enough work around? And given the growing level of precarity that have been going over the last 30 years with globalization, neoliberalism, and changes in technology. And the natural thing that comes up is, will a universal basic wage help? And or what will it mean for labor unions, given their traditional paradigm on how they want to function?
Yeah,
So,
good, really good question, John. Yeah, excellent. It sort of wraps in the technology question and policy question. So Christy, this will be kind of your, this is a high level question.
I mean, on the one hand, I think everybody should have a basic, decent standard of living. And so that's a floor. Whether that's a living wage with social protection, there should be that for everyone. But on the other hand, the linking UBI to technology, I think it's just really a false choice. It's a way for the technology companies to avoid paying their price, what they owe to society. And they're just walking away with billions and billions of dollars on this, you know, during COVID. You know, Jeff Bezos alone could give every single one of his workers $100,000, 108 actually, and have the same wealth he had in February of last year. So that's a nice UBI. I think that when people talk about UBI, it's like, well, let's just give everybody, you know, this small amount of money that eliminates all their, you know, money they should be getting from the state for other reasons, and that should settle it. And I don't agree with that. I think there has to be different kind of redistribution of wealth and power, and it shouldn't take the form of you know, a small little, you know, amount for everyone and the rest eat the, you know, have all the glory. So I'm not convinced, though I do understand that it doesn't mean we should have no floor. We should have a floor, but I don't think UBI should be linked to technology. So, I mean, I'm kind of opinionated.
Yeah.
The second part of the question is equally important. Do you think it will change any way that unions or your organization will function as some of these issues come online? I mean, it's partly an institutional, organizational question about paradigm shifts. I mean, Rolando Mook has written a lot about the paradigm shifts that's going on, and other people are talking about international labor issues.
Yeah, I don't, do I think technology will change it or UBI will change it? Technology, I think that the discussion you're talking about is more prominent in the US precisely because unions have less power in the US. And so people are kind of like, well, how are we going to evolve to, having no power from having little power, and, what's the paradigm shift there? I don't think that unions elsewhere in the world, especially in Europe, where you have to say they've got more power, are saying, well, we're not going to have any power because there aren't going to be any jobs. They're not at that point yet. It's like, let's talk about a shorter work week. Let's talk about more holiday. Let's talk about redistributing wealth in a different way. I don't think that represents a paradigm shift in the way unions work in the mega sense, because it's still about how do we best represent the worker? How do workers still come together for collective power and represent, their best interests? And I think that it makes unions more important in the new world of work, not less. So
Yep.
I don't see it as being like the farewell party for unions. I think it's the opposite. And that's what we hear from a lot of workers, like the Google workers, for example, but others in tech who are saying, this is not the glorious job I expected. I want dignity. My expectations have been raised to a certain point. I want to be able to, work on projects that I care about. I want, I think that I don't think that it's the sort of, we're in the swan song of let's talk about a new paradigm. I think that we really need to, some unions really need to change and act differently and have different, system, some unions need to change. That's not to say we don't all need to change in some ways, but I don't see it as a new paradigm. So maybe I'm kind of too old and stuck in the mud, but that's my.
No, that's a good answer. And I'm actually going to have our newest board member do the last question. That's Petra Hansen from the Swedish Embassy, who has a question about OECD guidelines. Petra, are you on?
Hi, thank you so much, Steve. Yeah, I'm with the Swedish Embassy, and thank you, Christy, for this extremely interesting presentation. So you're in Geneva, but in Paris at the OECD office, they've set up a unit called the Global Deal to try and provide like a counterweight to the trade paradigm and all the other topics that the OECD is covering, and also with having had an enhanced role within the G20 framework that the OECD has gained in the past 5-10 years. So I was just curious to hear your views on that. But I also thought it was extremely interesting what you were saying just now about trade unions having to adapt the way we all have to adapt to new realities. So if you have any more to say on that, that's really also super interesting. Thanks again.
Thanks, Petra.
Well, on the Global Deal, I mean, Uni belongs to the Global Deal. I'm on the steering committee of the Global Deal. So, we generally think it's a good idea to promote social dialogue and bargaining, but I would say there's a little bit of naivete about it because the companies that are signed on to the Global Deal, most of them do not have bargaining outside of Western Europe. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm pushing that, like, come on, guys, we're all in this together, or guys, women, whatever. But like, it's not good to say we love social dialogue, but only if it's in Sweden. That doesn't work, or only if it's in, wherever it's required. But as soon as you go to Malaysia, it's a different story. As soon as you go to the US or Poland. So we need to that needs to evolve in a good way, but I love the work that the Global Deal does to promote bargaining as a positive thing. I think it's really great. I rely on their work a lot, and so I like the research papers. I just think we need to push the employer members to actually walk the walk and not just talk the talk. So that's kind of my thing about the Global Deal. Unions adapting. Yeah, we're all adapting. I mean, the Swedish unions are the best. They've got everything like so online. And so, you can join the union online. You can, the Swedish unions are Unionen in particular, but others handles are really doing a great job of updating and modernizing. And Unionen is a growing union. A lot of our unions have been growing during COVID. They've proven themselves incredibly useful to their members. Time when workers are, desperate and really, needing that support. And I think the unions in Sweden, I'm saying because, you're familiar with them, but they've done a great job and their membership growth reflects that. some unions are slower than others, but that's always going to be the case. But I think we all need to, lift our game. We want to be a little more younger, a little more female, a little, kind of the demographics need to shift a bit in some of our unions, but that's happening. So.
Great. Thanks so much. This has been a great conversation. Christy, keep up the incredible work. We really enjoyed having you. This is one of the advantages of this new Zoom world.
Yeah, exactly.
You were not going to be able to jet over here for an hour-long presentation, but this was really great. I'm sure our members appreciate it, and we really encourage you to salute you for the ongoing work that you do. Just to remind folks, February 24th, we'll be sending out a notice. We're going to have Anya from the German Embassy and Steve Sylvia with Horst Mundt from EG Metall. This is part of our ongoing series of conversations with folks about what's happening throughout the world of work. And Christy, again, thank you very much, and have a great day.